we're back to the core of this course is choosing a all right, girls. Nora, right? Choosing a strategy. And as I began last time, we have four major, the four, they call them main strategies. Global standard, okay, I will write these in red. Global standardization. Global standardization. Number two, localization. Strategy. This is a repeat from last time. Number three, you got transnational. Are you zooming a little bit in so that you can see a little better? Sure. Transnational strategy. And number four is international strategy. Strategy, that's number four. The matrix with the drivers, that's on page 464. Goes like this. You have here local responsiveness, low and high, and over here you have cost pressure, and cost pressure will be again low and high. So the global standardization strategy is here. Number one, international strategy is going to be number four. Transnational localization strategy is number two. And over here is transnational number three. So we begin with global standardization strategy. Number one is first and foremost the nature of this global standardization strategy is a low cost strategy. You are pursuing a low-cost strategy on an international scale, on global scale. Here, there is no customization. You use exactly the same. No customization. You use exactly the same products. The main idea, of course, is economies of scale, economies of scope, and economies of scale, economies of scope, and location economies. plus learning effects. So, which are these? These are industrial goods. So we got many industrial goods. The best example will be semiconductors, like memory chips for all sorts of laptops, okay? CPU for all sorts of laptops and all sorts of mobile. So standardized industrial goods and many commodities. Example of a commodity will be rice. Yes, you gotta keep it as cheap as possible to be competitive. But for rice, you don't need any localization. Rice here in Thailand is the same as rice in China, same as rice in Japan, and even the same as rice in Bulgaria and Germany. Of course, you have different sorts of rice, but overall, you don't need to localize the product to the market. Let's see. So, it's difficult to find in consumer goods. For consumer goods, it's very difficult to find because consumers usually require some form of customization. Whether it's a mobile, whether it's this, whether it's that. As long as you have a consumer good, usually consumers will need some form of customization. But for industrial goods and for commodities, this applies. So that's number one. Number two is the opposite corner. The opposite corner means that you have low cost pressures, or very low, but you have high need for local responsiveness. You must localize. So this localization strategy basically means that you will customize the product for the particular market. You will have one type of product for one market. You're going to have a different type of product for a different market. One simple example we're going to have partial adjustment is Windows. You've all seen Windows, and I can only guess that you are using Windows in German language, right? Do you guys do that? Well, here they use Windows in Thai language. Well, when I was in Taiwan, people of course use Windows in Chinese language, okay? So you got a core product, but it's customized for each market. And of course, many people in Bulgaria use Windows in Bulgarian language, okay? So the product is not 100% customized. You still use the same core product, but you customize it a little bit for the particular market. Many lectures ago, I gave you the example of BMWs selling in the Middle East. Well, it's so damn hot over there, 50, 55 or 60 degrees Celsius, that a standard BMW, the radiator isn't big enough and powerful enough. Standard one sold in Germany is not good enough to handle the overheating in the Middle East and North Africa. So you just customize it or localize it by putting in a much bigger radiator and a bigger radiator fan, okay? You don't need to change the gears, you don't need to change the tires, you don't need to change the engine, okay? So that's a simple local responsiveness. Another type for the market is in Bulgaria now we sell a lot more BMW diesel engines, while in the Middle East it is very difficult to find diesel fuel. So in the Middle East, and gasoline is so dirt cheap that all you sell is gasoline engines, okay? And you don't even have natural gas or LPG, okay? How do you call it? LPG, right? So we don't have any of this. So this is simple responsiveness where you localize the product to fit the local market. I also gave you the example of localizing the Levi's, which you can wear them very tight in Germany and even tighter in Bulgaria, but in the Middle East they have to be loose, okay? Tight is not culturally acceptable. You gotta localize the product. Okay, so localization is somewhat costly, okay? So localization is costly in the sense of expensive. It costs money to localize, okay? And you will do the localization only if the value created is higher than the cost. So costly, but you'll do it only if value created is higher than the cost. And essentially only if you can charge a little more for the product, okay? So you'll charge a little bit more for the product. Of course, for a BMW, just a little bit of a different radiator isn't gonna cost a lot. Maybe less than 100 euro at most, okay? It's not gonna cost a lot more. You're replacing one radiator that costs, let's say, 130 with another one that costs 150. No big deal, okay? But you need to fit the market. Let's see what else we got. This is associated mostly with consumer tastes. You have to localize when you have consumer tastes and when you have special consumer preferences. Example of special consumer preferences in the Middle East is for big engine, like 4-liter engine, like 5-liter engine, okay? I mean, these won't sell at all in Germany. They will not sell in Bulgaria. In Bulgaria, we like 1.8 or 2-liter engines, okay? 2-liter engines for our taxation and consumption, all the other things. Over there, oil is cheap, gasoline is cheap, and they really like huge engines. 3, 4, 5-liter engines is just fine, okay? Some people pride to have a car with a 6-liter engine, all right? I mean, you rarely get these in Europe, and especially in the UK. UK gasoline is extremely expensive, and tax is extremely high on a very large engine. But in the Middle East, it's okay, and people they want to have a 3, 4-liter engine. So here you got consumer preferences. Now, another example of consumer preference is I talk to a lot of people in Bulgaria, and we talk about Galaxy Note. Galaxy Note is huge, and they say, oh, no, I don't like Galaxy Note. Galaxy Note is too big. It's too big in my hand. It's too uncomfortable. They want a little bit smaller. This one is a Galaxy Nexus, is a little bit smaller, and many Bulgarians will openly say that, oh, it's still too big for me, okay? So their preference is for a little bit smaller, okay? Now, when I was in Macau, they want big, they want huge. And everyone is buying the biggest on the market. That was a year and a half ago. And everyone's buying Galaxy Note. And you got these tiny little Macau girls. They're very, very small. I mean, they're 150, 155 at most. Little girls with little hands, and they hold a huge mobile in their hand. And they love it, and they enjoy it. They like it. They want to have a big screen mobile, okay? So it is a matter of consumer preference. And again, I'm not saying that, oh, Bulgarians are right, or the Macau are wrong, or the other way around. We're not even saying who's right, who's wrong. There is no right and wrong. It's just some people like small, other people like big. And you respond to the market, okay? That's the way the markets work. So you got consumer tastes and preferences. Value added, I already discussed. And that's pretty much it. Now we go to number 3, transnational strategy number 3. You gotta keep the cost low, so you have to be cheap, and at the same time you have to localize. And as businesses learn out, it is damn hard. It is extremely hard. This is the hardest of all strategies. Hard in the sense of difficult. Here, you gotta be extremely careful about costs. You gotta keep the cost low, but at the same time, you have to, by all means, localize. So, this is, we call it trade-off. There's a trade-off between keeping it cheap and keeping it local. If you want it more localized, it's going to be more expensive. If you want it cheaper, it's going to be less localized. And this trade-off, this balance between keeping it cheap and keeping it local is extremely difficult. So here, you have to transfer core competencies both ways. So, core competence it has to be two-way transfer. Whatever the core competence, and as I was explaining a lecture ago, and you all studied in strategic management, core competence is the foundation of competitive advantage. Whatever your core competence is, you have to transfer from the centralized to the different, it's called them locale, to the different areas. But you also have to keep, and whatever you learn from the local strategies or from the local implementation, you got to move the competence back around the world. So, to keep your competitive advantage and core, you need to transfer core competence both ways, two ways. So that's a key one. They call it multi-directional flow of skills. Multi-directional flow of skills. And of course, the question is how to do it, and I'll be explaining a lot more. Next is architecture. Architecture, I will be explaining organizational architecture the next hour in about 20-30 minutes when I'm finished with these strategies. The most difficult part here is how to organize the structure of the enterprise in order to fit these two conflicting goals, to keep it both cheap and localized. When I say localized, this is the same as what you study in strategic management, differentiation. Right, you guys study strategic management, you study differentiation strategy, right? So you have differentiation, but at the same time you got to keep local. And here comes the hardest question of how to design the architecture so as to fit these two conflicting goals. The problem is that if you design it one way, the one type of architecture will give priority of cheapness over localization. If you design the organization differently, it will give priority of localization over cheapness, but the strategy requires that you must balance both. If you don't balance them, you're going to fail. Here is the basic lesson here is that most international corporations fail to implement this strategy. And they fail to implement it because it requires a balance, and the balance is hard to achieve. It's very difficult, and they always shift their focus to the one or shift their focus to the other, and they lose the trade-off. They lose the balance. So that's for this one. It is here we add that it's very complex. Of course, it's hard, it's difficult, it's complex, and it is challenging. These are all key words. Okay. And number 4 is here. This strategy is easy. Why? Well, first of all, you got low cost pressures. You are not forced to keep costs low, so you got some leeway on inefficiencies, and at the same time you don't have to localize the product significantly. Okay, so in this particular case, this one is hard, very hard, and this one is very easy. A company being here is lucky. They don't have the cost pressure, they don't have to do anything. So here, it's very logical, it's very simple common sense that what you're going to do is you produce for your home market, and then as you produce for the home market, you're going to start exporting abroad. You take the same product and you export it abroad. So simple export strategy. Simple. Here, that's what multinational basically, international basically means. You take your product and you move it to the global market. Here, the product serves universal needs. Serves universal needs. So you don't need to localize a lot, okay? It's fairly universal. And the other key, so for the localization, and over here for the low cost pressure means there is little competition, little local competition. Little local competition. So if you got a little local competition, you could be a little bit inefficient, or you can keep the price a little higher, okay? You can keep the price a little higher. So usually it starts with exports, and then they may adjust or they may do, but that's fairly easy, that's fairly common sense. There is nothing hard here, there's nothing really difficult here. Now, what will happen here is the following. If you have low cost pressures, over time, competitiveness will build. Over time, competitors will move over, and you cannot maintain this strategy for a long time, because if you start out here, soon enough as competitors enter the market, you will have more competitive pressure and more cost pressure. So over time, you will be forced to move over here. Do you understand this? This simply means, hey, now we have little local competition, but soon the Chinese will come in on the market for more competition. The Japanese will come on the market for more competition. The Koreans will come in on the market for more competition. And after a while, as the market grows, develops, and matures, competition will force you to be moving from strategy number 4, international, to some sort of global standardization strategy. So this would happen, okay? Now, same thing here. 2 is not as difficult, but over time, even though you have low cost pressures, over time, competition will force you to be more competitive. Example here was the iPhone. iPhone is fairly standard product, but the operating system is for different languages, okay? And early on, when the iPhone was the only smartphone in the global market, they had little cost pressures. Well, now, as Samsung and HTC and the other competitors are moving in, now you have more and more pressures on the smartphone market, so you will have to adjust. In other words, if you're in this position, don't expect to stay long in this position. You should expect to be moving somewhere here. And if you're in this position, don't expect to stay long. You're going to be moving over here. And there is yet another possibility. Another possibility is that you're in this easy position, but not only you will be forced to cut costs, in other words, to be more competitive, but you may also be forced to have possibly some localization of the product. So you may even move from here over here. So the dynamics always goes from low cost pressures to high cost pressures as competition builds up. So you'll have to be moving this way or this way. But you will not see moving from this way to this way, probably not, because it's not likely that if you have today pressures to localize, that tomorrow you will not have to localize, okay? It's not likely that, for example, Microsoft Windows has been using it in German language for 10, 15 years, and after 2 years, they won't have to offer any more German language, okay? They still have to offer German language. So you don't see this trend very often, okay? All right? And this is the section of what I'm doing with these arrows is called subsection number 5, evolution of strategy. Number 5, evolution of strategy. Evolution of strategy. In other words, you start out from one point and over time you have to evolve. Now, I'm going to jump now because I just finished the chapter. I'm going to jump out and make the connection with the next chapter. The next chapter is organizational structure. And I'm going to repeat a little bit from the very beginning. The so-called basic strategy paradigm. And the basic strategy paradigm stated that strategy must be consistent and conform with structure and must be consistent and conform with operations. When we say structure, structure is the same as organization. Same as organization. So, what I'm trying to explain to you is something amazingly simple. As strategy evolves from one type of strategy, let's say from 4 to 1, if your strategy changes, you will have to change the organizational structure. And most corporations are not able to, let's call it now, restructure their organization, and that's one of the reasons why many multinational corporations fail. The common reason is that they use a strategy which was successful. As the competitive environment changes, they have to change the strategy, and they do change the strategy, but are incapable of implementing organizational restructuring, so they use the old structure to run a new strategy, and that's a recipe for failure. And that's how most businesses around the world, multinational businesses around the world, fail. They use the old one. Example will be Nokia. Nokia did the old product with the old technology, with the old organizational structure, and as iPhone and Galaxy came to the market and development, Nokia could not respond. Nokia could not respond. That's a good example of the failure of Nokia. Well, now Nokia is struggling hard to catch up, but it's extremely difficult. Nokia was, well, let's say for about 10 years, the leader, #1 company in the world when it comes to mobile phones, okay, mobile technology. Yet Nokia now is way behind when it comes to just phones, like smartphones, okay? HTC is even much better, okay? So this is an example where you gotta restructure, and if they don't, it usually results in a failure. This is good enough? Okay? 5 or 10 minute break?